dry sense of humor. This is the podcast to my YouTube channel. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I have a merch shop and a Patreon that you can go check out. Please help a girl out. Gotta find a way to make rent somehow, right? Anyway, now that we have all that away, why don't we dive into today's episode of the True Crime Lounge? Season 3 of TCL will be called Oh the Irony. We will discuss the ironic ways that serial killers get caught. The first episode we spoke about the BTK killer and how floppy disk got him caught. This episode we will talk about one of the most famous serial killers in the world. He is one of my top 5 favorite serial killers. Yes, I have top 5. Of course, my favorite serial killer is the Happy Face Killer. I just love that case. There's something always that fascinates me most about that case. Anyway, I actually read The Phantom Prince by Liz Kendall, and it was really good. I do recommend you going to read it. In the book, she talks about her relationship with Bundy and how it is definitely a must-read if you have not. Fun fact, Bundy even helped with finding the Green River Killer. That's just crazy right there. Bundy was born Theodore Robert Bundy. He is a serial killer with 14 plus victims, with his murders ranging from 1973 to 1978. His victim profile includes girls and young women, and his methodology is murder. His methodology is beating with a metal bar and strangulation. His crimes were active in Washington, Colorado, Utah, Oregon, Florida, Idaho, and Vermont. He was executed by electrocution in Florida on January 24th, 1989, and it is believed that the person who electrocuted him was a woman. Talk about irony, right? See. Let's give a little bit of a timeline. November 24th, 1946, Theodore Robert Caldwell is born into a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. May 19, 1951, his mom Louise marries Johnny Bundy, and her son takes his stepfather's last name. In spring of 1965, he graduates from Woodrow Wilson High in Tacoma, Washington. Fall 1963, he enrolls at the University of Puget Sound and attends the school until the spring of 1966. June 23rd, 1965, the murders of Lonnie Trumwell was seriously murders Lonnie Trumwell, and he injures roommates Lisa Wick in their Seattle apartment. Fall 1966 to spring 1969, he attends the University of Washington. 1967-1968, he courts Stephanie Brooks, who closely resembles his future victims. Fall 1968, he breaks off the relationship with Bundy. So, that's just some of his timeline. Bundy was born to Elizabeth Lund Home in a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont, to Eleanor Louise Caldwell. Though the father remains a mystery, his birth certificate is listed as Lloyd Marshall. However, his mom would go on to say that it was a war veteran by the name of Jack Worthington who seduced her. His family did not believe the story expressed by suspicion about Louise's violent, abusive father, Samuel Caldwell. Trying to avoid the social stigma, his maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Caldwell, claimed him as his son, and that he would take their last name, becoming Theodore Robert Cowell, which is still on the Mormon wall till this day. One of my favorite things about knowing that information. Do not ask me. Do not ask me why. Like I said, he's in my top 5 favorite serial killers. He grew up believing that his mom was his older sister and would eventually learn that Louise was his mom while he was in high school. Anne Rule, a true crime writer who knew Bundy personally, said that in and around 1969, following a traumatic breakup with his college girlfriend, for the first few years of his life, Bundy and his mom lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Then in 1950, Bundy and his mom believed to be his sister still, moved with relatives to Tacoma, Washington, and this is where the surname Cowell changed to Nelson. Then in 1951, 1 year after the move, she met Johnny Culpeper Bundy at an adult singles night in Tacoma's First Methodist Church. In May of that year, the couples were married, and soon he adopted Ted legally, changing his name to Bundy. Johnny and Louise would have more children. Bundy would spend much of his time babysitting, and his stepfather tried to include him on camping trips and other father-son activities. However, he remained emotionally attached from his stepfather. Bundy was a good student at Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, and he was active at the local Methodist church, and he was serving as vice president of the Methodist Youth Fellowship. He was also involved with a local troop of the Boy Scouts of America. Socially, Bundy remained shy and introverted throughout high school and early college years. He would say, hit a wall in high school. And, sorry guys, I lost my train of thought for a second. And he was unable to understand social behavior, stunning his social development. He maintained a facade of social activity, but he had no natural sense of how to get along with other people, saying, I don't know what made things tick. I don't know what made things tick. I don't know what made people want to be friends. I don't know what made people feel attracted to one another. I didn't know that what the underlying social interactions. Years later, while on Florida's death row, Bundy would eventually describe a part of himself from a young age, fascinated with the image of sex and violence. His early prison interviews, Bundy called this part of himself the entity, and while still in his teens, he would look through the libraries and detectives' magazines and the books of crimes, focusing on the source described sexual violence, and featured on the pictures of the dead body of violent sexuality before he was even out of high school. He was a compulsive thief, a shoplifter, and on his way to becoming an amateur criminal. To, su- to support his love of skiing, Bundy stole skis and equipment from and forged the ski lift tickets. He was arrested at twice as a juvenile. These records were later expunged. In 1965, he graduated from Woodrow Wilson High, awarded a scholarship by the University of Puget Sound, UPS, ironically. And he began to get fall in courses in psychology and Oriental studies. After 2 semesters, he decided to transfer to Seattle's University of Washington. While a university student, he worked as a grocery bagger, a stock shelfer at Seattle's Safeway store at Queen Anne Hill, as well as other odd jobs. As part of his studies in psychology, he would later work as a night shift volunteer at Seattle Suicide Hotline, suicide crisis centers that served as the Greater Pilot metropolitan area in the suburban area. There, he met and worked alongside with former policewoman and fledgling crime writer Anne Rule. who would later write a biography of Bundy and his crimes, and she would call The Stranger Beside Me. He began a relationship with fellow university student Stephanie Brooks, a pseudonym, whom he met while at UW in 1967. Following her 1968 graduation and return to her family home in California, she ended the relationship. Fed up with what she described as Bundy's immaturity and lack of ambition. She would go on to state that around this time, he decided to pay a visit to his birthplace, Burlington, Vermont. There, according to the rule, he visited the local records and clerks, and finally uncovered the truth about his parentage. So, after his discovery, he became more focused and a dominant person. In 1968, he managed the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller presidential campaign attended in 1968 Republican convention in Miami, Florida, as a Rockefeller supporter. He re-enrolled at UW, this time with a major in psychology, and he became an honor student and was well liked by his professors. Then in 1969, he started dating Elizabeth Caloper, a divorced secretary with a daughter who fell deep in love with him. And they would continue dating for more than 6 years until he went to prison for kidnapping in 1976. Bundy graduated in 1972 from UW in psychology, and soon afterwards he again went to work for the state Republican Party. Did not expect him to be. Anyway, which included a close relationship with Governor Daniel J. Evans. During his campaign, he followed Evans' Democratic opponent around the state, recording his speeches and reporting back to Evans personally. A minor scandal later followed by Democrats found out about Bundy, and he began posing as a college student. In the fall of 1973, he enrolled at the law school at the University of Utah, but he did poorly. He began skipping classes and finally dropping out in the spring of 1974. While on a business trip in the summer of 1973, he came back into his ex-girlfriend, Stephanie Brooks, who life with a new look and attitude, and this time he was a serious, dedicated professional who had been accepted to law school, and he continued to date Crawford as well, and neither woman was aware that it existed. Bundy courted Brooks throughout the rest of the year and accepted his marriage proposal 2 weeks later. However, shortly after New Year's 1974, he dumped her, refusing to return her phone calls. And a few weeks later, after his breakup, he would begin his murderous rampage in Washington. So, no one knows exactly when and where he began killing. There are some who say that he may have started killing as far back as his early teens. Anne Marie Bird, an 8-year-old girl from Tacoma, vanished from her home in 1961 when Bundy was 14. Though he has always denied killing her, the day before his execution, he told his lawyer that he made an attempt to kidnap a woman in 1969, and implied that he committed his first actual murder sometime in 1972. At some point in his death row confessions with Keppel, he committed to his murder being his first murder in 1972. In 1973, one of the Republican friends saw a pair of handcuffs in Bundy's Volkswagen. He was there for many of the suspect. He was there for many years of the suspect in 1973 murder of Kathy Devine in Washington State. but DNA analysis led another man arrest to conviction of the crime in 2002. Bundy's earliest secrets identified murders with were committed in 1974 when he was 27, and shortly after midnight on January 4th, he entered the basement door of 18-year-old Johnny Lenz. This is also another false name, a dancer and student at UW, and he bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her bed frame while she slept and sexually assaulted her with a speculum. Lenz was found the following next morning by her roommate in a coma, laying in a pool of her own blood, and she survived the attack, but suffered permanent brain damage. So his next victim would be Linda Ann Healy, another UW student. In her early morning hours of February 1st, 1974, Bundy broke into Healy's room, knocked her unconscious, dressed her in jeans and shorts, wrapped her in a bed sheet, and carried her away. Co-eds began disappearing at a rate of roughly 1 month. And on March 12, 1974 in Olympia, Bundy kidnapped and murdered Donna Gail Manson, a 19-year-old student at the Evergreen State College. On April 17, 1974, Susan Ramcart disappeared from the campus of Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. Later, two different CWSC co-eds recount meeting a man in his arm with his arm in a cast. One that night and one 3 earlier, who asked for their help. Next was Kathy Park, later on campus of Oregon State in Corvallis, Oregon. In May 6, 1974, Brenda Ball was never seen again, leaving the flame tavern of barium. June 1st, 1974. Bundy did murder Georgia Hawkins, a student at UW and a member of Kappa Alpha Theta. Then an on-campus sorority. In the morning hours of June 11, 1974, she walked through an alley from her boyfriend's dormitory residence and to her sorority house, and she was never seen again. Witnesses last reported seeing a man with a leg cast carrying a briefcase in the struggle. One co-ed reported that the man asked for help in carrying the briefcase to his car. A beetle. And okay, fun fact, I've actually seen the beetle. So in Gatlinburg, there is a true crime museum called Alcatraz East. I have a problem, I know. And they have it there. So anyway, back to the episode, shall we? I'm gonna get you off track. His killing spree culminated on July 14, 1973, with the daytime abduction of Janice Allen and Denise Noshin from Lake Samarish State Park in ICQ. That day, 8 different people told the police about the handsome young man with his left arm in a sling who called himself Ted. 5 of the women whom Ted asked for helping unloading a sailboat from his Beetle. One of them who went to Ted, as far as the other one goes, where there was no sailboat before declining the company any further. 3 more witnesses testified seeing him approach them would approach him off with the story of how a sailboat was seeing her walk away from the beach in his company. She was never seen again, and Neshman disappeared without a trace 4 hours later. King County detectives had a description of both the suspect and his car, and witnesses told investigators that Ted they encountered spoke with a clipped British-like accent. Soon flyers were all over the Seattle area. After seeing the police sketch and description, the Lake Samarish suspect in both the local newspapers and television news reports, Bundy's girlfriend, one of the psychology professors at UW and former co-worker Ann Rule all reported him as a possible suspect. The police, receiving up to 200 per day, did not pay any special attention to the tip with a clean-cut law student. The fragmented remains of Nashland was discovered September 7, 1974, off I-90, in 1 mile from the park. Found along with a woman's remains were an extra female bone and a vertebrae, which Bundy would identify as that of the Georgian Hawkins, shortly before his execution. So between March 1st and March 3rd, 1975, the scales and jawbones of Healy, Rancourt, and Balls were found on Taylor Mountains just east of Issaquah. I apologize if I'm butchering that up. Years later, Bundy claimed that he also dumped Manson's body there, but no trace was ever found in Utah and Colorado. That morning, he began attending the University of Utah school in Salt Lake City, where he resumed his killing. Nancy Wilcox disappeared from Holiday, Utah on October 2nd, 1974, and he was seen riding in a Volkswagen Beetle. On October 18, 1974, Bundy would go on to murder Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of Maldo Police Chief Louise Smith. He would rape, sodomize, and strangle her. The body was found 9 days later next to Laura Ann Aim, also 17, who disappeared without a trace at a Halloween party in Leahy, Utah, October 31st, 1974, in her naked and beaten strangulation course, found from a month later hikers in Thanksgiving Day, one of them on the river in Fort Canyon, and Murray, Utah, on November 8, 1974. Calderonch nearly escaped with her life, claiming the officer to be Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department. Bundy approached her at the Fashion Place Mall and told someone that he had to break into her car and asked her to accompany him to the police station. She got into the car, but refused to instruction to buckle her seatbelt. They drove for a short period before Bundy suddenly pulled to her shoulder and attempted to slap a pair of handcuffs on her. In her struggle, he fastened both loose on the same wrist, ripped out a crowbar, but Durange caught it just in time before it would have had cracked her skull. She then got to open the door and tumbled onto the highway, escaping from the would-be killer. About 1 hour later, a strange man showed up at Viewmont High School in Bountiful, Utah. I wonder if that has something to do with the Mormon name. Anyway, where the drama club was putting on a play. He approached the drama teacher, and then the student asked to come to a parking lot to identify a car. Both declined, and the drama teacher saw him again before the end of the day. Taken this time, breathing hard, with hair mussed, and his short untucked. Another student saw a man lurking in the rear auditorium. Debbie Kent, who was 17 years old and a student at the high school, left the play at intermission to go and pick up her brother, and was never seen again. Later, investigators found a small key in the parking lot. It unlocked handcuffs that was taken off Durange. In 1975, while attending law school at the University of Utah, he shifted his crimes to Colorado. On January 12, 1975, Karen Campbell disappeared from the Wildwood Inn at Snowmass, Colorado, where he had been vacationing with her fiancé and his children. He then vanished into a span of 50 feet between the elevator doors in her room. Her body was found February 17, 1975. Next, Val Key instructor Julie Cunningham disappeared on March 15, 1975, and Denise Olivius Oliverson in Grand Junction on April 6, 1975. So while in prison, he would also confess to Colorado investigators that he used crutches to approach Cunningham. He didn't ask to help carry some ski boots to his car. At the car, Bundy clubbed her with a crowbar, immobilized her with handcuffs, and left her strangling in a highly evolved crime. Lynette Culver went missing in Flagler, Idaho, March 6, 1975, from the grounds of her junior high. After returning to Utah, Susan Curtis vanished on January 28, 1975. The bodies of Cunningham, Culver, Oliverson have never been recovered. Meanwhile, back in Washington, investigators were attempting to prioritize their enormous list of suspects. They used computers to cross-check the different likely list of suspects against each one, and suspects who turned up more on the list. Theodore Robert Bundy was one of 25 who turned up on 4 separate lists, and his case was the second one to be investigated, when the call came in from Utah of an arrest. Bundy was arrested August 16, 1975 in Salt Lake City for failure to stop for a police officer. A search of his car revealed a ski mask, crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, an ice pack, and other items thought by the police to be burglary tools. Bundy remained calm during questioning, explaining that he needed the mask for his skiing, and found the handcuffs in a dumpster. Utah detective Jerry Thompson connected Bundy and his Volkswagen to the Duranch kidnapping and the missing girls, and searched the apartment. The search was uncovered a brochure of Colorado ski results with a check mark by the Wildwood Inn with Karen Campbell. And after searching for his apartment, the police brought Bundy in for a lineup before the ranch, and the bountiful witness identified him as Officer Roseland, and that was the man lurking around the night Debbie Kent disappeared. Following a week-long trial, he was convicted of Duranch's kidnapping May 1st, 1976, sentenced to 15 years in Utah State Prison. Colorado authorities were pursuing murder charges, however, and Bundy was extradited to stand trial. On June 7, 1977, in preparation for a hearing in Karen Campbell murder trial, he was taken to the Pipkin County Courthouse in Aspen. During a court recess, he was allowed to visit the courthouse law library, where he jumped out of the building from the second-story window and escaped, but sprained his right ankle during the jump. In the minutes following his escape, Bundy at first ran and then strode casually throughout the small town toward Aspen Mountain. He made it all the way to the top of Aspen Mountain without being detected, where he rested for 2 days and in an abandoned hunting cabin. But afterwards he lost his sense of direction and wandered into the mountains, missing 2 trails that led down the mountain onto his intended destination, and the town of Crested Butte. Crested Butte, that's funny. And at one point, he became face to face with a gun-toting citizen who was one of the searchers occurring Aspen for Ted Bundy, but talked his way out of danger. On June 13, 1977, Bundy stole a car that he had found from his friends, and he drove back into his Aspen apartment and could have gotten away, but the 2 police noticed that the Cadillac with dimmed headlights weaving in and out of the lane, and Bundy pulled over and recognized him and took him back to jail. Bundy had been on the land for 6 days. He was in custody, but worked out a new escape plan, and he was being held at Glenwood Springs, Colorado jail, and awaited trial. He had acquired a hacksaw blade and $500 of cash. He later claimed that the blade was from another inmate, and over the next 2 weeks, he sawed through the fixing of a small metal plate in the ceiling, and dieting down further was able to fit a hole across the crawl space. And information toward the prison guards had Bundy moving around ceiling during the call the night before the escape, but no matter but the matter was not investigated. So when Aspen trial judge on December 23rd, 1977, of the Campbell murder trial would start on January 9th, 1978, a change of venue to Colorado Springs, Bundy realized that he had to make his escape before he was transferred out of Glenwood Springs jail. On the night of December 30th, 1977, he dressed warmly in a packed booth and filed under his bed blanket to make it look like he was sleeping. He wiggled through the hole and up into a crawl space, and he crawled into a spot directly over a jailer's linen closet. The jailer and his wife were out for the evening, dropped in down to Jailer's apartment, and walked out the door. He was free. He was on foot in the middle of a bitter cold Colorado night. He stole a broken down MG, but it stalled on the mountain, and Bundy was stuck on the side of I-70 in the middle of a blizzard, but another driver gave him a ride to Vail. From there, he caught a bus to Denver and boarded a TWA 8:55 a.m. flight to Chicago. The Glenwood Springs jail guards did not notice he was gone until the next day. In Florida. Yep. He was determined not to serve his sentence. This is why actions have consequences, right? Anyway, following his arrival in Chicago, Bundy then caught an Amtrak train to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he got a room at the YMCA. On January 2nd, 1978, he went to Ann Arbor Bar and watched the University of Washington Huskies, the team of his alma mater, but Michigan on the Rose Bowl. He later stole a car in Ann Arbor, which was abandoned in Atlanta, before boarding a bus to Tallahassee, Florida, where he arrived January 8, 1978. Then he rented a room in a boarding house under the alias Chris Hagen and committed numerous petty crimes, including shoplifting, purse snatching, auto theft, a stolen student ID card, and he grew a mustache and drew a fake mole under his right cheek, and then went out. But when the personnel officer asked Bundy for his license for identification, he walked away, and this was his only attempt at job hunting. So 1 week later, after his arrival, the early hours of Super Bowl Sunday, January 15, 1978, 2.5 years of repressed homicidal violence erupted. He entered the Florida State University Chi Omega sorority house approximately 3 a.m., killed 2 sleeping women, Lisa Levy, Margaret Bowman. And do I really have to say his MO? Nope, I don't have to. We all know his MO. February 9th, he traveled to Lake City, Florida. And while there, he abducted, raped, and 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, throwing her body into a small pig shed. February 12th, he stole yet another Volkswagen Beetle and left Tallahassee for good, and heading west across the Panhandle. February 15th, he stopped in Pensacola. He was stopped by a Pensacola police officer, and the officer called in and checked the license plate, and the vehicle came up as stolen. Bundy was cuffed, and the officer before was finally subdued. As Lee took the unknown suspect to jail, Bundy said, "I wish you had killed me." Like, seriously? Oh my gosh, you guys can see why this is one of my favorite serial killers of all time. I know I'm odd, but anyway, odd people are the best people, I think. He was immediately transported to Tallahassee, in charge with the Lake City murders. He was taken to Miami to stand trial for the Chi Omega murders. So, bite mark testimony of the Chi Omega trial. Um, went to trial, would go on for June 1979, with Dade County presiding, having 5 court-appointed lawyers, but he insisted on acting as his own attorney. He even cross-examined one witness, including a police officer who discovered that Margaret Bowman's body, and prosecuted the assistant state's attorney, he was prosecuted by the ASA, Larry Simpson. 2 pieces of evidence proved to be crucial. First, the Chi Omega numbered Nina Neary, getting back to the house very late that day, and saw Bundy as she left, and identified him in court. Second, during his homicidal frenzy, Bundy bit Lisa Levy on the left butt cheek, leaving obvious bite marks, and police took a plaster cast of Bundy's teeth, and forensics expert matched the photographs of his wound. Bundy was convicted on all counts, sentenced to death, and after confirming the sentence, Coward gave the verdict. Guilty, right? Yep. He was tried for Kimberly Leach's murder in 1980, and he was again convicted as well on all counts due to fibers. So while awaiting his execution, Bundy was housed in a cell next to fellow serial killer Otis Toole. For the murder of Adam Walsh. Yep, I talked about that episode. If you want to go back and look at it, for season 1 of this beautiful podcast. So, um, during this same period, Bundy was often visited by Special Agent William Hagemeyer of the FBI BAU, and Bundy would confide in Hagemeyer. In 1984, he contacted former King County homicide detective Bob Keppel and offered to assist in an ongoing search for the Green River Killer by providing his own insight to analysis. Like, seriously, just the irony in this right now. Like, you can see why. You can see why. And I'm not like the whole Pinterest level crazy with it, but anyway. Both detectives later stated that these interviews were actual help to the investigation. His mugshot in 1980, the day he was sentenced to death for the murder of Kimberly Leach, Bundy contacted Keppel again in 1988, and at that point his appeals were exhausted, and he had beaten previous death warrants on March 4, 1986, July 2nd, and November 18, 1986. With his execution imminent, Bundy confessed to 8 official unsolved murders in Washington state, for which he was the prime suspect. He also told Keppel that there was actually 5 bodies left at Taylor Mountain, not 4, as they had originally thought. He confessed to the murder of George Hawkins, describing that how he lured her to a car, clubbed her with a tower urn, and drove away. So the night before he was executed, he gave an interview with James Dobson, head of the evangelical Christian organization focused on family. During the interview, he said that he repeated to have claims of pornographic roots of his crime. So, Bundy was in custody. So, he was in custody and had a fairly consistent MO. He was very approached by a potential victim in a public place, even in daylight or in a crowd. He abducted. He also had a remarkable advantage of his facial features that were attractive yet especially memorable. Okay, have y'all seen the movie with Zac Efron? Oh my gosh, does he not look like him? That's the crazy part right there. And trust me, Zac Efron is a good-looking man. Anyway, all of his victims were females, white females, and most of them middle-class background, although between ages of 15 and 25, and were college students. But Hagerman would also go on to state that Bundy considered himself an amateur and impulsive killer in many years. On death row, he admitted to decapitating at least a dozen of his victims with a hacksaw. He kept the severed heads later and found them on Taylor Mountain. This guy's just sick right here. Yeah, I'm attracted to sick people. I don't know why. Sick humor. He was even a necrophiliac. Like, that's just gross. Don't get me wrong. He also confessed to keeping souvenirs of his crimes. In December 1987, Bundy was examined for 7 hours by Dorothy Lewis, a professor at NYU Medical Center, and she diagnosed Bundy as manic depressive whose crimes usually occur during a depressive episode. To Lewis, Bundy discovered it was from his described his childhood, his relationship with his maternal grandparents, and according to Bundy, Cowell was a deacon at the church. Mm, so Bundy also described him as a bigot who hated blacks, Italians, Catholics, and Jews. He also stated that his grandfather tortured animals, beaten the family dog, and swung the neighbors' cats by their tails. He also told Lewis that his grandpa kept a large collection of pornography in the greenhouse where, according to his relatives, Bundy and his cousin would sneak in. Yeah, there was a lot of skepticism, as you can probably imagine, like right now. But yeah. But that is it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. I hope y'all have a great day, and remember, join my Patreon for early access if you want early access to videos and everything else. Also, go to the merch shop, buy something. I know you want to buy some true crime merch, right? Who doesn't? I will see y'all next time, and y'all have a great day.